What happened when 32-year-old influencer Rachel Morrison threw scalding hot coffee directly at tomb guard specialist James Wilson's face during the sacred changing of the guard ceremony wasn't just arrest, it was the kind of federal response that would destroy her entire life within hours. The next 60 seconds would prove that disrespecting America's most sacred military site comes with consequences she never imagined. Hit subscribe if you believe attacking our military heroes should have serious consequences. The Morning Suncast. Reverent shadows across the white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier, where Army Specialist James Wilson stood in perfect formation, his dress blue uniform immaculate beyond human comprehension, every thread positioned with the mathematical precision that represented America's promise to never forget the sacrifice of heroes whose names had been lost to history but whose service would be honored forever. At 25, James embodied the sacred dedication that tomb guard duty demanded: 8 months of flawless service, 2 combat deployments to Syria, and a Purple Heart earned when an IED explosion had taken the lives of 2 soldiers in his unit while leaving him with scars that ached during Arlington's cold mornings. James had volunteered for tomb guard duty not for recognition or prestige, but because his grandfather, Staff Sergeant Michael Wilson, had been declared missing in action during the Korean War, his body never recovered from the frozen mountains, where he had died holding a defensive position that allowed his unit to retreat to safety. For 73 years, the Wilson family had lived without a grave to visit, without a final resting place where they could honor their hero's memory with flowers and prayers and the quiet conversations that families share with loved ones who can no longer respond. Standing watch over 3 unknown soldiers who represented every missing hero, every unrecovered body, every family denied the closure that comes from knowing exactly where their loved one rests. James understood that his perfect posture and flawless movements weren't ceremonial performance, they were sacred promises kept to families like his own, guarantees that someone would always remember and honor the sacrifice of heroes whose names might be forgotten but whose service would. Rachel Morrison approached the tomb of the unknown soldier with the entitled confidence of someone who had spent 32 years believing that rules, consequences, and social expectations applied to other people, but never to her. As a social media influencer with 2.3 million followers across various platforms, Rachel had built her brand on provocative content that pushed boundaries, violated norms, and generated the kind of controversy that translated into engagement metrics and advertising revenue that supported her lifestyle of luxury travel, designer purchases, and the constant validation that came from viral content. Rachel's background was one of privilege unchecked by responsibility, wealth untempered by wisdom, and attention addiction that had grown more severe as her content became increasingly extreme in the pursuit of views, likes, and the dopamine rush that came from trending hashtags and viral videos. She had been banned from multiple social media platforms for violating community standards, had faced lawsuits for defamatory content, and had developed a reputation for targeting respected institutions and individuals in ways that generated maximum outrage and engagement. Her decision to target military ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery represented the culmination of years of escalating disrespect, a calculated attempt to create the kind of viral content that would restore her relevance in an increasingly competitive social media landscape where influencers younger and more extreme were constantly threatening her position. Rachel had researched tomb guards specifically, learning about their training and standards not out of respect for their service, but to identify the most effective way to disrupt their ceremony and create content that would generate maximum shock value. What Rachel didn't understand, what her privileged background and social media bubble had never taught her, was that she was about to commit federal crimes against some of the most protected and revered military personnel in the United States, at a location that was considered sacred by millions of Americans and defended by multiple law enforcement agencies with the authority and determination to prosecute violations to the fullest extent of federal law. Rachel's approach to the tomb was deliberately designed for maximum viral impact, with multiple cameras positioned to capture what she expected would be her triumphant disruption of what she mockingly called military theater in the social media posts that had been building anticipation for her Arlington stunt among her followers. She had timed her attack to coincide with the changing of the guard ceremony, when maximum numbers of tourists, military families, and veterans would be present to witness what she planned as the cornerstone content for her next viral campaign. The tourists and Gold Star families gathered around the tomb that morning had traveled from across America and around the world, seeking connection with the sacred space where three unknown heroes represented every service member who had ever given their life for their country. Among the crowd stood elderly veterans who remembered friends lost in forgotten battles, military families whose own loved ones rested in other sections of Arlington, and children learning for the first time about the price of the freedom they had inherited from heroes they would never meet. Rachel stepped across the ceremonial chains that marked the boundaries of sacred ground with the casual arrogance of someone who had never learned that some spaces demanded reverence regardless of personal beliefs or social media objectives. Her movement disrupted the solemn silence that surrounded the ceremony, drawing concerned looks from visitors who sensed that something inappropriate was about to happen in a place dedicated to honoring the sacrifice of America's unknown heroes. "This is what your tax dollars pay for," Rachel announced loudly, her voice cutting across the Memorial Plaza as her cameras rolled and her followers watched via live stream. Grown men playing dress-up while real problems go unsolved. Time for a reality check. Without warning, without hesitation, without any consideration for the sacred nature of the ground where she stood or the families whose heroes were being honored, Rachel hurled her large cup of scalding hot coffee directly at James's face. The coffee struck James with enough force to knock his military cap from his head, the hot liquid splashing across his face and soaking into his dress blue uniform that had taken hours to prepare to the perfection that tomb guard duty demanded. Steam rose from his face where the coffee had made contact with his skin, and for a moment that seemed suspended in time, the entire Memorial Plaza fell into stunned silence, as hundreds of witnesses processed what they had just seen happen at America's most sacred military site. But what happened next wasn't the viral content Rachel had expected to create. James absorbed the scalding coffee attack with the same controlled discipline that had carried him through combat deployments and months of tomb guard training, straightening his uniform, retrieving his cap, and returning to his position with the unshakable composure of someone whose dedication to honoring the dead transcended personal comfort, personal safety, and personal pride. The response from military and federal law enforcement was immediate and overwhelming in its scope and intensity. Within 30 seconds of Rachel's attack, Arlington Cemetery Security, U.S. Park Police, FBI agents assigned to monument protection, and military police from multiple branches converged on her position with the coordinated efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this kind of violation of sacred space and assault on federal personnel. Rachel found herself surrounded by more than a dozen law enforcement officers representing federal agencies with jurisdiction over her crimes, their movements swift and professional as they secured the scene, protected the ongoing ceremony, and began the arrest procedures that would transform her moment of social media attention, seeking into the beginning of federal prosecution. That would destroy every aspect of her carefully constructed influencer lifestyle. The tourists and military families who witnessed the attack watched in amazement as the full weight of federal law enforcement descended on someone who had violated not just social norms or cemetery regulations, but multiple federal statutes protecting military personnel and sacred sites from exactly the kind of assault and desecration that Rachel had committed in pursuit of viral content and social media engagement. James remained at his post throughout the arrest and investigation, his focus on his sacred duty rather than the chaos surrounding him, his commitment to honoring America's unknown heroes unshakable despite the personal attack he had endured. His face showed redness from the hot coffee, but his bearing remained perfect. His attention remained fixed on his responsibilities, and his dedication to protecting the sacred. Memory of the fallen remained absolute despite the violation he had suffered. The ceremony continued with the precision and dignity that tomb guards maintained regardless of disruption, proving that no amount of disrespect, no level of assault, and no social media stunt could diminish the honor accorded to America's unknown heroes by soldiers who understood that some duties were more important than personal comfort or safety. As federal agents processed Rachel at the Arlington Cemetery Security Facility, something began to unfold that would transform her understanding of what she had actually done and the magnitude of the legal consequences that awaited someone who had committed assault on federal property against military personnel at America's most sacred military site. What had seemed like a simple arrest for disorderly conduct was revealing itself as a complex federal case involving multiple agencies and statutes that carried penalties far beyond anything Rachel had imagined when she planned her viral stunt. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, who specialized in crimes against federal personnel and monuments, began explaining to Rachel the serious nature of the charges she was facing while federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence that multiple cameras had captured of her premeditated attack on James during his sacred duty. "Miss Morrison," Agent Santos said, her voice carrying the professional authority of someone who had prosecuted similar cases, "you're not facing a simple assault charge. You've committed federal crimes against military personnel on federal property, with aggravating factors that include premeditation, disruption of a military ceremony, and desecration of a national monument." The charges began accumulating with devastating precision as federal attorneys reviewed the evidence and witness statements. Assault on federal personnel, a felony carrying up to 8 years in federal prison. Disruption of a military ceremony, a separate federal offense with additional penalties. Trespassing on restricted federal property, violation of cemetery regulations, and destruction of government property, in the form of James's uniform that would require complete replacement due to coffee damage that could never be fully cleaned from the precision-maintained fabric. But the charges that would destroy Rachel's life went beyond the immediate assault. Federal prosecutors had reviewed her social media history and discovered a pattern of planned disruption and premeditation that elevated her crimes from impulsive misconduct to calculated terrorism against federal institutions. Her posts leading up to the attack, her coordination with followers to maximize viral impact, and her deliberate targeting of military ceremonies transformed her case from simple assault to domestic terrorism charges that carried decades in federal prison. Rachel's social media empire, which she had thought would benefit from the controversy of her Arlington stunt, began collapsing within hours as platforms removed her content for violating terms of service related to violence against military personnel and federal crimes. Sponsors canceled contracts, brand partnerships evaporated, and the advertising revenue that had supported her lifestyle disappeared as companies distanced themselves from someone who had attacked a military honor guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The federal investigation expanded beyond Rachel's individual case as authorities examined her followers, her financial backers, and anyone who had encouraged or supported her attack on James. The FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit began investigating whether Rachel's actions were part of a broader pattern of attacks on military ceremonies, whether she had coordinated with anti-military groups, and whether her social media platform had been used to incite others to similar attacks on federal personnel and sacred sites. Captain Jennifer Martinez, the commanding officer responsible for Tomb Guard operations, provided victim impact statements that would be used in Rachel's federal prosecution, documenting not just the physical assault on James, but the psychological impact on military families who witnessed the desecration of sacred space and the disruption of ceremonies that honored their fallen loved ones. "This wasn't just an attack on Specialist Wilson," Captain Martinez explained to federal prosecutors. "This was an attack on every Gold Star family who finds comfort in knowing that their heroes are honored with dignity and respect. An attack on the sacred trust that America places in soldiers who volunteer to stand watch over our unknown dead." The social media backlash against Rachel exceeded anything she had experienced during her controversial career as an influencer. Military families, veterans organizations, and millions of Americans who had never heard of her before the Arlington attack united in condemnation of someone who had assaulted a soldier performing sacred duty. Death threats, doxing, and harassment forced Rachel into hiding while federal marshals provided security during her prosecution. The same government protection extended to someone who had attacked government personnel at a government site. James continued his tomb guard duties. Despite the assault, his dedication to honoring America's unknown heroes unshaken by the attack he had endured. The coffee stains on his face had healed, but the memory of maintaining his sacred duty while under attack had reinforced his understanding of what it meant to serve something greater than personal comfort or safety, to protect the honor of fallen heroes even when that protection required absorbing violence from people who didn't understand the sacred nature of military sacrifice. 6 months after Rachel's attack on James at the tomb of the unknown soldier, the full weight of federal justice had transformed her from a social media influencer with millions of followers into a convicted federal felon, serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison, her life systematically destroyed by consequences she had never imagined when she threw coffee at a soldier, performing sacred duty at America's most revered military site. The federal trial had been a masterclass in how seriously the United States government prosecuted crimes against military personnel and sacred sites. Federal prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation, including social media posts planning the attack, coordination with followers to maximize viral impact, and Rachel's own recorded statements describing her intention to humiliate military theater, Arlington National Cemetery. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding her guilty on all federal charges, including domestic terrorism, assault on federal personnel, and desecration of a national monument. Judge Patricia Williams, a federal judge with 30 years of experience prosecuting crimes against government personnel, delivered a sentence that reflected the gravity of attacking military honor guards at sacred sites. "Miss Morrison," Judge Williams said during sentencing, "your actions weren't just crimes against Specialist Wilson or disruption of a military ceremony. You attacked the sacred trust that America places in soldiers who volunteer to honor our fallen heroes, violated the sanctity of ground where unknown soldiers rest, and caused psychological harm to military families who witnessed your desecration of their loved ones' memory. The financial destruction that accompanied Rachel's federal conviction exceeded even the criminal penalties. Civil lawsuits from military families who had witnessed the attack, federal restitution requirements for damages to government property and personnel, and legal fees that had consumed her entire social media fortune left her bankrupt and facing decades of debt that would follow her long after her release from federal prison. But the personal destruction went beyond financial and legal consequences. Rachel's family had disowned her after the Arlington attack, unable to reconcile their relationship with someone who had assaulted military personnel at a sacred site. Her friends abandoned her as the social and professional costs of association with a convicted domestic terrorist became clear. The isolation that came with federal conviction for attacking America's military heroes was complete and permanent, transforming her from someone who had craved attention and social connection into someone who would spend the rest of her life defined by a moment of disrespect that had seemed like social media content but had revealed itself as something far more serious. The broader impact of Rachel's case extended far beyond her individual prosecution. Federal authorities used her conviction to send a clear message about the consequences of attacking military personnel and sacred sites, publicizing the case as a warning to others who might consider similar acts of disrespect and violence. Military families and veterans organizations praised the severe sentence as appropriate justice for someone who had violated the sacred trust that protected America's most revered military ceremonies. James Wilson received recognition for his extraordinary composure during the attack, earning commendations from military leadership for maintaining his sacred duty despite being assaulted at his post. But for James, the recognition was less important than the knowledge that his response had demonstrated to military families and the American people that no amount of disrespect or violence could diminish the honor accorded to unknown heroes by soldiers who understood the sacred nature of their duty. The Tomb Guard program implemented additional security measures following Rachel's attack, but the core mission remained unchanged: maintaining perfect honor for America's unknown soldiers regardless of threats, disruptions, or attacks from people who didn't understand the sacred nature of military sacrifice. James continued his service with the same unwavering dedication, understanding that Rachel's assault had actually reinforced the importance of what tomb guards protected and why their standards could never be compromised. Margaret Sullivan, the Gold Star mother who had witnessed the attack while visiting her son's grave, wrote to James expressing gratitude for his response to being assaulted while honoring the dead. "Son," she wrote, "watching you maintain your dignity and duty while being attacked showed me that my boy and all our heroes are protected by soldiers who understand what sacrifice means. That woman tried to dishonor sacred ground, but your response honored it instead." The lasting legacy of Rachel's attack wasn't the viral content she had sought to create, but the demonstration of what happened when someone violated the sacred trust that protected America's military ceremonies and unknown heroes. Her life had been destroyed by 15 minutes of federal prosecution, 15 years of federal imprisonment, and the permanent mark of being someone who had attacked soldiers performing sacred duty at the nation's most revered military site. So what do you think? Tell us in the comments.